Welcome back. I got some more shallograms, as you can see, that we're gonna go through. So, pardon me if you find this boring, but I hope if you're watching it, I imagine not. So, let's just go ahead and move forward. Anyone who hasn't seen any of my shallogram episodes, yeah, I got a lot of them, so I'd recommend like really looking at the basis for what I'm saying when I'm about to say what I'm about to say. The basis is really established in my other videos. Okay, they're not fossils, they're etched by current flows that were highly pressurized water-based currents that formed in this specific region of the Himalayas that at times swirled in the rock as well as moved the material, the grains themselves, and shaped the rock. Like it was all part of the process. There wasn't a pre-existing rock per se. Like the material was being brought together and shaped by highly pressurized currents, and sometimes it was more formed than other times. So certainly there's nuance to that, but the critical element is these things are forming by current flows. So this one is from KRE on eBay, maybe, possibly Amazon. India. So let's just go to the next image real quick. It's got this top thing, like whoa. Mound, and kind of peanut shape around it. Kind of like a eddy center and eddy center. And then like a conjoining boundary. I don't know what exactly is going on here. I just found it interesting. But if we go back here, let's see if there's anything anomalous. Like this, there's a lobe. It's kind of squished, first of all. This shape is curved. I wonder, it looks like back there it goes straight across parallel to this chakra. So there are features in shallograms within the ammonite structure that dip down into little points known as chakras that tend to be opposite to one another. Like this, let's say, chakra, where this one's going diagonally. Very odd. And then it seems to even have like a curvature to this region that then kind of straightens out over here. I don't know if that's just like the happenstance of the angles, and it would look more normal seeing the whole of it, but it looks a little odd just by the way it starts bending more and more, and almost bending like pretty heavily right there. Looks like it starts to bend less over here. So this one's cool, but it's not like I could go through it a little more. Like out here has ammonite shapes like this stuff, but it's at like a different layer, a different height. So is it like part of the same shell? Is it the next like spiral out that it was, if it was a shell, like it continued out here and around and out to here? Or is it just like the highly pressurized currents that are creating these structures of, how do I describe this? Like, I want to not give too much detail where it's kind of just repetitive, so definitely see my recent videos for more detail, because I'm going to just kind of quickly do this. This one's just not the best example because of its weird top and bottom. Maybe the best example is up here. Let's just go to find this one real quick. Looks like a snake. There it is. Okay, so what happens is the shale material, the pyrite and quartz and whatever other materials, as well as water, are under high pressures where they run into resistance. And because there's resistance, like say the earth, so like there's a current flow of water that's running into resistance, which can be downward because it's highly pressurized due to depth, as well as pressurized due to the formation of mountains. So it runs into resistance in essence, and that causes a material that's flowing in the currents that's kind of elongated to start to squish. And as it does that, the shale particles in that material don't just sit there. They start to cycle through the structure here, or whichever structure, but this one's just exemplary, where then they essentially drain down a top side where the pressure is being applied from into a bottom region where the resistance is applying a counter pressure. So there's still pressure, but it's from resistance rather than a flow applying a actual pressure. So there's a current pressure due to just the overwhelming amount of water involved that's applying a high enough pressure to then run into this resistance and have this interaction happen, where then the shale et al. Kind of forms a mass, but then over time it cycles where the shale goes down physically through the chakras and into the bottom region, and it amasses here in the bottom region, where then from the bottom region, it physically forms a path of overflow from the bottom back up because there's resistance of like the earth in front of it, so it doesn't really flow in front of it like out and spread out. It actually starts to wrap around, as well as other pressures of just the water in general. So it's like only able to get so big kind of thing, where then the external pressures from all directions of the highly pressurized water are essentially keeping its shape. So the current flow of the particles within the stone that have not yet solidified are caused to flow from the bottom back to the top and then drain through, where then in the ammonite region they differentiate. So if they're shale, they're more fine-grained particles, so they are more easily able to pass through the chakras and down into the bottom, into the base, where they then accumulate until they overflow back to the top. And sometimes this will cut off and this will be gone, and there's all sorts of nuances. But the point is that there's this cycling going on, which is not really, I think we're just gonna, okay, not really as basic in this one. Like something's going on with this peanut and 2 nodes thing going on the top. This is the top for sure. The bottom is where it generally has a flat face because it's running into resistance. So it's more typically takes this flat face structure, and then the top tends to have a mound that drains through depending on how capable it is to drain in the circumstances. So in this circumstance, it seems to have actually formed this ammonite structure, but then the base physically flowed back to the top in a manner where it actually built these mounds. Notice also there's this connection between the ammonite structure and then another portion of ammonite structure. That's essentially the same eddy where there's potentially a conduit. I'm not sure if that's where it would be, but there's tend to be strips of solid shale without the ammonite structure that can join the base to the top as a actual conduit where the current flowed from the bottom to the top of shale being transported by water. But besides the point, really, it's flowing to the top, and then some other stuff on the bottom. Let's just keep going a bit. So this one, same thing's going on, where there's this material is being essentially compacted under highly pressurized currents, but then the current gets into the stone and etches out the internal segments of the stone. So like this was not just a void. When this stone started to form, it formed more like a nodule, or I think that's maybe a thing. Geology nodule. More just like a sphere with like a basic internal structure and a shell, but like not with an ammonite in essence. But over time, as the circumstances of the current continues to take that spherical system and mold it into an oblong shape, the current has essentially more resistance downward. So and then because the boundaries of the rock extend outward, it's essentially more able to go to the side. So current starts to flow to the side more when it becomes oblong like this. It encourages current to the side, but that current starts to etch the materials and remove the materials and differentiate the materials. That's why they're so different in appearance. Like this is a grayish shale color. This is like a white sandy quartz pyrite looking thing. As well as notice the chakras are more corkscrew-like than the others. They sometimes can be corkscrew-like, sometimes they can be more pointy and regular shaped. But then the current flows between the sides, transports material. I'm trying to think what I took this shallograms and images for. I'll get to that one. That one's incredible. It must have been up here, I feel like. The front is pretty common. It might have just been the shape of the chakras, if anything, in the opening. Notice again, though, like this top segment, it's not disconnected from the bottom in that the ammonite fully disconnects. It goes around. It doesn't disconnect because the bottom feeds the top through a conduit channel, and that channel is essentially higher resistance to the ammonite formation process, etching it because it blocks off the flow. There's a flow there. It's kind of like like if there's a river flowing one way and another river flowing another way, if the river flowing the first way is much stronger, the secondary river flowing into it, let's say flows into it at a perpendicular angle, like if it's stronger, it's going to cut through and keep going. And the primary river, the first one, is going to have some of the current bend off, and maybe the path ends up taking a different path. But because the first one flow is dominant and able to resist the other flow, anything that reaches it actually tends to merge with it. So essentially the flows coming out from essentially what happens, pardon me if I keep saying essentially, is a flow starts etching out a block, a lobe here. And once it does that, it starts etching out another lobe. And then it starts etching out another lobe. And at some point, we find masses that have not been etched out. Like these, like the voids have been etched out, but there's masses where the material within the stone has begun to be etched out. It's begun to be shaped by the process, but it hasn't been actually extracted from the stone. So there's not a void here. There's material, but it's shaped, it's differentiated, it's experienced substantial amounts of the process. But then it tries to go out over this way, over like this way. But there's this upflowing current like replenishing this area that's going to the top through this area. So it's not actually able to. So like over here it's going out, as well as in and around like the backside, it's going out in the same way this is doing, going up and out this way, but back that way, where it then physically flows along the surface of the stone, runs into resistance like pressures from the outside that then bend it around so that it flows back into the stone and forms this eddy structure in an ammonite, which is then creates all these ribs as current flow past to avoid other currents, so it can flow more along those paths without eddy currents like pushing it off of the path. But over here, it doesn't get out of the stone, it doesn't create these ribs because there's this conduit path. Okay, let's get past this one. This one's just like, what in the... This is also KRE. That one is probably from KRE also. At first glance, someone who is not familiar with shallograms would look at this and say, well, I guess it's like two seashell looking things, because ammonites are considered to be fossils of sea creatures, so that there would be other seashells is not that much of a stretch of the imagination. So seeing these, it's almost like there's just two shells that were near each other that then fossilized. But the thing is it's really ammonite-like. Like they point at each other, they wrap around, like this wraps around over that way. But then they take this seashell shape, which ammonites don't tend to do, but then there's this block here, almost like this region pinched off the process. Some reason this region was influencing the process. Whatever was making this region be this shape ended up influencing the process to then like bow it out from the, like a pinch point here between a possibly a conduit path from the bottom back to the top that ended up building like restriction over here, so it built a mass over here and then flowed through though still and reached over here. And maybe there's some like type of chakra thing down below. Notice this, like if this is a seashell, then the boundary of this seashell is here, but it's also here, and yet there's these ribs. That's not what a seashell looks like. This is what a seashell looks like more so on this side, where the boundary is pretty much where these ribs are, so there's no like discrepancy. But over here there's a boundary to this mass, to this mound. that extends beyond where this is. So this region doesn't actually make sense, but if we look over here, like this wraps into it, like it's wrapping into it. So these are related to these, but they're not part of this apparent seashell structure, as well as it looks like they even come over here down this way, and this maybe meets here, like these physically, if this piece is removed, maybe they actually run up into each other. It kind of looks like that, like current was going around this way and underneath this, and then ramping, because it was running into resistance, ramping out, where current over here also was flowing in opposition, so maybe that participated in making this mass happen. Whereas up here, current was flowing underneath the top, up and around and over, out of these pores that it etched, up and around, running into resistance and bending around the stone, up and around, and then doing the same out of the opposing side over here, going this way and around, but then running into resistance and bending and ramping into one another, applying a pressure into one another to compress this region to just kind of keep it from being etched and extracted from the stone. So that's another face of it. I believe we're looking at this side. Looks relatively seashell-like here, but here it's clearly not. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay. This path. Let's see what else we can see. Maybe some ribs in there. In a strange way. This in general looks like a snake head with a neck back here, kind of like the other one, which is a tendency of the matrix that's on the top portion of a shallogram being fed from the bottom to then have a conduit path and then like a larger head-like shape. This one's real cool. I don't know if we see the bottom. There it is. Bottom just flat and much less defined features because it's not experiencing the inflow. It's actually where resistance is. So things tend to deflect before the resistance, so it leaves kind of like a unperturbed bottom face of the stone. This one's so anomalous in general. Really incredible. Let me see. I know I've come across other ones like it. I don't want to. There we go. Like this. It's kind of doing a similar thing in this one where it just looks like two seashells adjacent. Not even ammonite. It's just two seashells adjacent. But they're like at the same point across from one another here. This one's longer than this one, but ammonites tend to do that too, where they have a larger lobe and a smaller lobe. Smaller and larger. It also has like steps on it. So kind of reminiscent of that one. A couple others I've come across. Maybe I can find it not that long ago. We went over one that like had a seashell appearance, but it clearly is not as well. Let's see, where might that be? It's possible I passed it. So if you saw me pass it, my bad. Here's another instance where it's doing similar seashell looking thing. See some of my more recent videos for me talking about those ones. In terms of my more recent shallogram videos, which are pretty much my more recent videos. Wow, this is excellent content. No wonder people watch all the time. It's incredible. I know. Here's the one I was thinking of, where it looks like a seashell. Like, this looks like a seashell, doesn't look like an ammonite. I know ammonites are considered seashells. I mean, more traditional concept of seashell. Okay, this looks like an ammonite. But then this one, as I point out in that video, has a thickness, which we can see here, where it has the teeth of an ammonite and teeth of an ammonite. This is where the top of that seashell looking thing is. So it clearly goes to this width. It's actually, that's not what seashells look like. They don't have like a width like that. Like if over here, but the opposite side, like that though. Just has a width. Very not seashell-like. Okay, so again, we see that here. Definitely some others, but I don't want to spend too much time looking for them. There are some teeth there. That's, oh yeah, this one, this is from Quetzalcoatl on Amazon.in, so maybe the KRE ones were too from Amazon. So the most like odd thing about this is just like yes, it has this ammonite structure here, but then it has this like weird lobe coming off the side. It even maybe has a relationship across there. Can that right there, possibly there even. Possibly there. Also, we can see current paths. I think I mostly took it just because of that lobe area. It's odd. This is Vedic Vanni. Like, internal of this looks like this. So over here, there's like a ammonite structure, but then there's almost like a chakra forming here. Like this is not the same ammonite down here that's right here. So it looks like there's a chakra forming there. That looks more like a chakra formation process structure. Not part of this for sure. And then here is this thing. There's probably a better image even. It looks like a negative imprint. It's an imprint, so it's probably like a chakra here. And the imprint being that the formation is happening on the surface here, whereas this one's happening internally. Also looks like there's some details there. It's hard to say. It's not the highest quality images of the details I'm most interested in. It looks also like there might be something going back that way. In the stone, that might just be the picture, but... Okay, this is Rudraksh Guru. I haven't looked at these pictures in a while, I guess. Some of them I remembered, that one with the two shells. Definitely remember that one, but this one I don't remember, so let's see what happens. We see the ammonite, we see this boundary, and generally another lobe being etched here. Another lobe being etched over here that also looks like it continues down here. That way. And by being etched, I mean doing this. Where shallograms tend to do this, though, like I said, they form a lobe, where they remove the material, then a bigger lobe, and then a bigger lobe, and then a bigger lobe, to the point where they reach the boundaries that we see. And then they try to form another lobe, and how they do that is like this. And then go off the top, off the bottom, and off the far end. So these points of extension, basically, where the structure begins to extend, but tends to, like, seize because it's reaching the boundaries of the stone in a way where the internal pressure can just evacuate without having to grow to occupy a larger space. So it stops like ballooning to a larger structure and just has these paths that the pressure can be released. So here's another one doing the same thing. It's not like there was a part of a shell broken here and here and here and here, and whatever reason modern science has for these ones happening. They're internal pressures. So same thing's going on here, where it's got an internal pressure in this structure that's beginning to push the boundaries further to another lobe over here. And possibly even doing it within the stone more so than we see here, and it's just like etching outward and cutting holes along the boundary because that's the easiest path. Essentially, current in here that's flowing around, just like a fluid, is gonna flow into resistance, and then it's gonna like splash upward, like the ocean coming in. It hits resistance, and it just goes upward, goes in some way where the pressure directs it. So same thing's going on here, where the internal pressures where the internal pressures are pushing the fluid to a boundary, like most visible in like this one, like this far end, and then it's flowing out of the far end because it has nowhere to go from there except for outward into the higher pressures that are generally holding it back. But because there's all this flow going over there, it breaks through, creates a channel where the current can flow, as well as over here at the top and bottom of the lobe, like pressures upward are converging at that point, and then going outward, converging over here, going outward from downward pressures. Flows like generally going down, then around and around and converging and flowing outward. And then over here doing like a 1/3, 2/3 thing in opposition to this, some reason that I'm still not completely clear on in my head, but same thing going on here, generally speaking. Okay. So there's that. There's a completely other opening in the ammonite in the shallogram. Same shallogram, different face. It's got this weird boundary out here, almost like a stain, which like a water-based something, some kind of fluid can do, can stain outward, like it's pressures pushing outward, generally pushing a boundary where it like stains to that boundary, which even has like a tooth shape, relatively speaking. The chakra may or may not have a path behind it. It looks like it might. It's very rounded, smoothed surface as well. Again, the lobe is forming out here, so it's taking this path here. possibly trying to extend out this way too, but because it's like at the edge, this reaches the edge pretty much. So it's able to actually release current that then doesn't recycle into this eddy. Otherwise, like if it's in the space of the eddy, it just can't leave really. So it's just more pressure pushes more current in, so it has to etch outward into another lobe and another lobe. But at some point, it etches another lobe where it then can actually have an exit channel. Something going on there and there. Little nuances, like it's extending out and around. Same shallogram. Notice this staggers back. Goes over this way and then abruptly stops and goes this way. Has this node type thing going on there. There's a space there. Like it's not regular. But then this stain boundary. Another just like erosional lobe looking thing, and another one there. Almost like a shock right here was forming. But it didn't have space, so it did it weirdly. I wonder if there's like an ammonite shape there. Hard to say. Along these. Because these can form like an ammonite here, like the chakras, lobe. But a flat one would be really interesting to find. Just a piece of an ammonite, but what's cool about this one, look at these waves. Wave. Just a bunch of just like smeared shale all around the edge of this. As if current flow was pushing around, moving this material in a wave-like pattern that then solidified in its final state. Really an incredible detail. Incredible detail. Some teeth going off in like random directions over here. This is also much smoother down here. Possibly this came out of a larger structure, which it was part of, and exited into the high pressure currents, where then it was treated as a stone, like the other shallograms. It was treated like its own shallogram rather than a piece of one, and so it began to be have its surface etched by highly pressurized currents that for some reason selectively did this. I don't know why exactly, but like that doesn't really make sense for an ammonite shell to have these tooth features, which really come from like from these things. Like that's these things. But they're visible on the end over here. That doesn't actually make sense. Like they're not part of this ammonite for sure. So they would have to be part of another ammonite because they're clearly those shapes. And they even continue over here. Maybe even up there somewhat. Possibly across here some, and across through there for that one. This thing's kind of odd. Almost looks like a bullseye with a larger circle around it. Looks like current was going across this way. Really incredible detail too. The pyrite, like clearly the shale is like the negative, and then the pyrite material is more like the ammonite itself. But really, it's got these highly pressurized currents flowing into it and digging into it and creating these little divots like all throughout it. Really incredible. This one's so cool. See a little opening under there, down through there. Okay, cool detail. Cool detail. Okay, there's another image of these waves. Down there too. It's incredible. Right there. Oh my god. It's also going on over there in some weirder ways. The way this is a hard boundary is pretty cool. This must have been a huge ammonite structure. Let's go through this a little bit. Okay. KRE. Again. Just a little window into this one. Some weird stuff going on there. But notice this is all surrounded by a structure again. So there's some kind of relationship to this whole area. Between its parts. There's also this crack going through that appears to continue over here, over that way. With like a white material there that's not over here. Not so much here. This is grayer. This is like white. Almost like whatever's. It's like a current is flowing out of here up this way and then entering into what ultimately is another ammonite structure that forms because of the current flows and circumstances, where then it continues over this way, and the formation of this ammonite somehow brings this like white material, but only to the boundary of this stain thing going on, where then after that the crack is more normal again. Chakras are over here for this system, and probably another chakra below the shale here, like this, but not those ones. A gap there. So it was etching over through here, but it didn't actually reach over here yet. Perhaps suggestive of some order of operations to the process. It's possible someone glued this together. The two halves were actually broken and got reconnected. It looks like we can't see any more images. We're seeing this. Don't know what's going on over there though. Like this might connect over to this, whatever's going on over there, which then connects back to the top. I don't see any like clear threads, but maybe in some subtle way. It also looks like that might be a chakra there. Like whatever's going on there maybe connects over there. And maybe even in a way where like this behaves like a lobe here. Connecting this to this one through this. Which tends to happen in these where they're just threaded to one another. They're not like separate systems, they're literally threaded together. So we got an ammonite in here with this nucleus, really big chakra, but then this big old nucleus. But then we got a chakra right here where the ribs coming away from it, away, down. So like this rib points here. This rib points here, so there's a chakra forming here, right at the boundary of this. Doesn't even make sense. Doesn't even make sense from a fossilization standpoint. Like the perfect placement of it. This is even in line if we follow this boundary and just keep going. Like it's a continuous to here, which is forming the boundary of this chakra. So I guess some current in here is flowing out, but then was caused to go over this way, which led to like essentially an eddy on the surface over here that generally was forming the ribs down here, etching the material away. This is also like in a location where it's sort of forming another rib out this way, where over here is not so much. So maybe the current flow from in here generally had like a span that it could influence more directly that was over here, so that this region was etched so that the material's gone, whereas over here it's not gone, except for like this far boundary where maybe it's flowing into there, out and around. It's probably flowing this way, so maybe it's just flowing more so out from underneath here and removing the end of it. Some errant teeth structures and what have you. Sorry if this is a little less animated as my videos can be. Not that they're ever that animated, but it's pretty. I'm probably pretty low energy right now. Okay, I might stop after this one. This is Mangalam Jewelry, a Shiva Lingam type one. I thought it was interesting. I'm not sure if there's anything particular about it that I really wanted to point out or found of like distinct interest. There's certainly this crack going this way, and whatever's going on there. This smooth face that may or may not have broken. That doesn't look like it broke from that angle. Little segments here. Counter segments over here. Like these are going outward generally. Like flat with some kind of extensional lobe type things off of it. Down here it's got more of a boundary. Maybe here. Around that way, that it's got inward things making these little sharp points. Although this divides, interestingly, this goes this way around the top as well as bending early around this path like a short circuit. I don't know why exactly. These layers, so we're looking across these layers somewhat. It's hard to say from this angle. It looks like the middle one is part of this one, and then the left one's part of this one. The right one's part of this one as well. So maybe like this region is the higher one. Lower one. Possibly lower one. I don't know. It's hard to say. Some channels where currents were flowing. Whatever's going on inside of this is interesting. I don't know. Little arc to that. More of an arc here, but this also has like a wave where it goes down and arcs again, like the teeth. Tooth-like structure there, arc there, whatever counterlingam looking structure there. Some more oddities. This one is definitely here. That big thing. Possibly all of that. And then the next one looks related to that top portion. Bottom one, top portion. That looks like a chakra too. With steps down. Another one like that other one. I think mostly I took it for this. There it is. This is the other side. This side, not much going on besides the typical ammonite shapes. Which is this side again. Does look like there's maybe a surface roughness difference. Like, in weird ways. Where this side's smoother, this side's rougher. But then here, it's just got these pieces of the shale that had current flowing underneath them that are still stuck to it. Okay, I'm definitely stopping after this one. Little nodule to that. Missing that one. It probably points to something with how these form in the currents. Some oddities up here. Like, that's not normal. Possibly some more down there. This looks more normal. This looks abnormal. Possibly because there's like a layer of pyrite type material that's just making it look a little more abnormal. I don't see its boundaries though. It would have to go all the way to the other side and then coalesce with the shale down here. It's so pointy too, wow. Oh. Those ribs are beasts. Oh, they're like fins. Whoa. I didn't notice that before. This one's so cool. These are so cool. They're just so cool. Definitely could see the boundary there, I guess. So it must be going across. And up there. Both sides. So this is the side with this stuff. Let's see. That's so weird. Still attached. It's so crazy. Possibly reflective of what's happening on larger scales. Like, imagine in here is like a shallogram. That's being shaped until it reaches a certain size and segmented from its host material and then breaks away into the larger, the highly pressurized currents, where it then behaves like a new system, where really it was forming in like one of these crevices in a larger, very large system, which these structures happen. I've found them continental size scales, so they're not limited to the size of a rock. They can be mountains and mountain ranges and continents. Like Australia has. Okay. I'll be back sooner or later. See you guys later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Peace.